It is HPR, All Things Considered, member-supported Hawaii Public Radio. We're very excited because today we have a follow-up here. We're down at the Blue Note where Stanley Jordan is doing a couple of nights. Tonight's the last night. We're wrapping it up here with him. He's going to have 6:30 and 9 tonight. And the show is something that features some local folks, and we're really thrilled because the last time he was in town, he came and did the Atherton Performing Arts Studio with us, and it was in 2016, and now we're following it up down at the Blue Note. And thank you so much, Stanley. Great to see you again.
Glad to be with you again, Dave. How you doing?
I am doing great, and great to see you. How's things been in the 2.5 years since we last saw each other?
Really great. You know, I've been doing a lot of international traveling, and I just, in fact, just got back from Hungary. It was my third time playing in Hungary, and we played in this beautiful hall named after, well, in honor of Bela Bartok. He composed my favorite composition ever, Concerto for Orchestra. And there's just so much history of great musicians in Hungary, great composers, and so it was great to excuse me, it was great to go there again. So, you know, I'll have a few years where I'll be going to one place a lot. Okay. So a few years back it was Russia. Like for 5 or 6 years I was going sometimes twice a year to Russia, and I just really enjoy the international tours. You know, I feel like it's a great blessing and opportunity to be able to travel around so much. It's a kind of a fringe benefit of what I do.
It's a huge fringe benefit. That's a great way of putting it, actually, and the music's such a universal phenomenon. It's such an international thing, and it can connect with people in so many ways. Talking about connecting with people, in Hawaii, the two cats who you're playing with, very well known to local folks. And forgive me because I didn't know who it was going to be when I showed up at the show, and was really stoked to see them. And so tell people about having Bruce and Noel on the gig, and it'll just feel really good for people, the connection you're making.
Well, you know, the very first time that I well, no, I guess it wasn't the first time I ever performed in Hawaii, but the first time that I played here in a while. So I was coming back and I wanted to do something a little different, and I asked around for recommendations of musicians, and I spent some time on it, you know, and a lot of people recommended these two guys, Bruce Hamada and Noel Okamoto. So they came very highly recommended, and I felt very good about having them in the trio because they're really fine musicians. They're great guys, and I like it. It's part of connecting with the place, to play with musicians who know the area and people know them here. It makes me feel more connected to the community here.
That's huge, and they're so talented, and it was so cool. It was a great surprise for me. It won't be a surprise now. I guess we're ruining the surprise for people listening, but for me, it was a great surprise. I was really stoked to see them, and Bruce was just a monster, and Noel with a double bass. I mean, it was just crazy. And thinking about the music that you're playing, I mean, you can do anything, and with guys like that, obviously they're chart readers, so you could just say, here's what we're doing tonight. How do you go about picking a set list for these trio shows, and do you sort of each night do a completely different set?
We definitely vary it from set to set, and I have my main songs that I've been playing based on what my mood is at the time, or based on what the most recent album is, or different criteria. And I have a great system for this because I have a songbook database. And so whenever I decide what songs I want to use for an upcoming show, I just basically I choose them in the database, and then it generates a web page.
Like on your laptop you're doing that?
Yeah, it's like a secret web page just for the musicians, you know, and it's all laid out. Every song has the sheet music and an audio file to listen to.
So you can send those cats there, you're saying, and they can pick up what...
So people show up knowing the music. It makes it real easy for me, you know, and they don't have to pay it. They don't have to look at anything that we're not doing, you know. And and these guys are so versatile. And, you know, like Bruce, he plays the upright and he plays the electric. And some of the things that we do, like Stairway to Heaven, for example, which is a song that people think of in the rock genre, but I like how it sounds more with the upright bass. It just gives it such a bigger more powerful sound, you know. So the fact that Bruce has got that kind of versatility, and Noel, he's such a master of taste, you know, and he always knows just what to do. You know, the role of the drummer is so important in terms of, you know, building, and then changing, transitioning to different sections. When he goes to the ride cymbal, then we're cruising along. You know, he just really knows how to complement the song.
He's a monster, and so it's a kind of a varied set, but there are some core songs, and that makes sense. And in that, you were mentioning, sometimes you'll say, I'm just paraphrasing, sometimes when you're creating a set, it'll be based on maybe a latest album or something like that. Now, what's the status of, and forgive me, at the time it was called Feather in the Wind, I understood was going to be the name of it. What's the status of that?
So Feather in the Wind is finished, and it's not yet released. And so there's some behind the scenes stuff that we're working out around that. In the meantime, I have almost completed recording another album in Brazil, because I was in Brazil earlier this year. And so I've got 2 albums that'll be coming out relatively soon. And the Brazil album I'm also very excited about. Feather in the Wind has Milton Nascimento, world-renowned, fantastic vocalist in Brazil, and we also have some great Brazilian artists on the new one too. But since that one's coming out a little bit later, I'm gonna wait and tell people later the details on that.
Don't want to spoil the surprise on that. That's huge. And you worked with Charnette Moffat on his 2017 project as well.
Yeah, and you know, Charnette has been a great friend, and he supported me through the years, so it was great that he asked me to support him on his project. I played on the album, and we did some touring together. We did a lot of international stuff, and he's just such a passionate player, and so much energy and so much intelligence in his groove, his swing. We did some really long sets, like when we got to Athens, Greece, we played long sets.
What's a long set? Give me
like 4 hours.
one set.
Yeah.
For an audience.
Yeah, I mean, but the people were like, I've never done that before.
Grateful Dead style.
I wouldn't have the nerve to play that long, but Charnette was doing it, and I was right there with him, and people loved the whole thing.
Wow, that's huge. And what kind of place are you doing a 4-hour show at? Describe, is that indoor, outdoor, a festival?
This was in a club called the Half Note.
Club, and would figure, right? Because everyone's looking at their watch going, what is this guy doing? I'm supposed to be out of here by now. You know what's crazy about you is anyone who watches you play, there's so many things. There's a couple crazy things. One crazy thing is watching Stanley sit behind the piano playing the guitar and the piano. Now, he did that in the Atherton, and that didn't make it any less crazy having it right in the studio, but to watch it tonight was something else. And then the other flip side of that is when you watch, you're picking. You use a pick, I guess, sometimes, but a lot of the time it's just all this crazy stuff on your hands. So dialing back to thinking about when you first were introduced to instruments, before you became this genius musician that you are today who can do all this wild stuff, how is it at that young age you start on the piano? I think it was 6, from what I understand, and then you make that switch to guitar. Paint the picture of who it is who gets the credit for starting this, nurturing it, and maybe some of your earliest experiences or memories that you recall as you developed your passion.
Well, a lot of things come as a silver lining of a cloud, you know. So in this case, we had some difficult times in our family, and my folks had to get rid of the piano. My parents got divorced. Stuff was kind of crazy for a minute there, and I didn't have a piano to play, but I was able to persuade them to get me a guitar for Christmas. So we kind of took a step down in the socioeconomic ladder. So instead of being the kid whose parents could afford the piano and the piano lessons, I turned into a guitar player. But I loved it. I loved guitar.
How did you get started on the piano?
So we had a piano in the house since I was very young. And my sister tells me I was playing when I was 3, which I don't even really remember. But she was a little bit older, and she was taking lessons on piano. So then I'd get up there, and I remember playing when I was 5 because my father taught me how to make animations in the margins of books, and you flip the pages, you know. and my mother had lots and lots of books. So I had free reign with my mom's books. So I would do these epic cartoons. Some would take 15 books. And so I needed music for them. And so anyway, I had certain characters that appeared, frequently. My number one character was Griffey Grasshopper. And so my first song that I ever wrote was Griffey Grasshopper's theme. So it was actually for a character for animation. And I remember that because I remember I was 5 when I wrote that song. And I actually started taking lessons when I was 7. And so I took lessons and played and composed, and I was composing in a sort of a late romantic style. And this was up until about the age of 10. And then that's when everything kind of changed, and I didn't have the piano anymore, and I started playing guitar when I was 11.
Because of economics, really.
Yeah, but it was a fortunate accident because I loved guitar. I was starting to get interested in different music. I had been brought up playing more like classical and romantic music, and I was getting interested more in rock, R&B, blues, and guitar to me felt more like an instrument for that music. Also jazz, I was getting interested in as well. So when I started playing guitar, I really connected with the guitar, and I really felt like, okay, this is it. I know the guitar is really my instrument. And it was a few years later that I started to miss some of the possibilities of the piano. And that's why I started experimenting with the guitar with different techniques to try to bring some of the pianistic stuff to the guitar.
So that unorthodox finger technique that you're using is really inspired by your nostalgic missing of your piano time.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with that. There's other threads that go in. I don't know how much time you have here, but there was another aspect of all this because I was very interested in electronic instruments, making music with electronics, and I was developing this idea of an electronic fretboard because I was looking at this book, and I realized it was a book with piano chords, and I realized that if I were not limited to one note per string, I could play any of the chords in this book. These were piano chords. And I realized if I had an instrument that was not really strings and frets like a normal guitar, but a matrix of push buttons, so it was an electronic instrument that connected to a synthesizer, then it would be logically laid out like a guitar, but physically it would be a keyboard instrument. And I could play it with both hands. Right. So I started to develop this instrument. Well, I was living in the Bay Area, the place they now call Silicon Valley. And my dad was the first personnel manager at Hewlett Packard. And I was surrounded by a lot of technology and stuff. And I used to build all kinds of circuits and stuff. And so I already knew enough about electronics to build this instrument, but I didn't know enough about woodworking, that kind of stuff. So I set out to acquire that knowledge and skill. So while I was working on that, in the meantime, I decided to see how closely I could approximate that idea on a normal guitar. And so I could still only play one note per string, but I could still do the independent hands idea. So I started doing it on my normal guitar, and I realized, hey, wait a minute, there's a lot of possibilities with this just on guitar.
Like I don't need to make a special thing.
Well, I just decided, okay, I'll finish that later. Right. And then what ended up happening is, the idea was in the air and other people invented the same thing. And so I didn't have to complete it because, I was able to acquire that instrument later. And
is that like the thing Edgar Winter plays?
I don't know about.
It's like a keyboard that you walk around with, kind of thing. Or no, you're talking about somebody invented
I haven't seen his in particular, but there's a couple of different ones. Well, there's the main one that I play is called the Z-tar, and just exactly as I imagine, it's a matrix of push buttons, and
it looks like a guitar's body.
Yes, yes. I mean, there's different versions of it, but most of them look like a guitar body. Yeah.
Do you play that live ever?
I used to play it more frequently. You know, for practical reasons, I don't bring a lot of instruments on the road with me. You know, if if it weren't for the practical limitations, yeah, I'd bring all kinds of stuff. You know,
I can imagine you.
the thing is, a set is only so long, and so, you know, in order to really develop an idea and bring it to fruition, you know, I have to focus myself anyway.
No, that makes sense. I can imagine you'd have Stanley's workshop of stuff up there on the stage. When we're thinking about your as you describe this technique on the guitar, and I think of your age, I'm just wondering, like, and I don't know if we talked about this before, but Eddie Van Halen, where were, like, when did you discover his playing, and what did you think of it as the innovator you were? Because he was doing something kind of different too.
I guess I first heard about Eddie when I was a freshman in college, and I really appreciated what he was doing. Definitely the same technique, a different approach, you know, not the independent hands approach like I was doing, but by combining the two hands working together with a technique that I call helping hands, because the hands help each other to play the same part, you know. He was doing ridiculous arpeggios and stuff, and his taste and his sense, his musicality just really blew me away. So, you know, there were a few people going in different directions, because you also had the Chapman stick. Emmett Chapman invented the stick, and the stick technique, the approach that Emmett took was very similar to what I was doing. He actually did it before I did, but I hadn't heard about the stick until I'd been doing it for about a year. And so that represents another offshoot, because the stick is the setup is really different from my guitars, so it doesn't easily physically translate over, but it is something at some point I'd like to you know, to do. Then we also have the acoustic tapping, and I would say that Michael Hedges was probably the source of that river, you know, and you have a lot of people influenced by Michael.
Dude, it was huge. Watching My Life Go By was one of my very powerful album when I was a kid. Yeah, Michael's a very soulful guy. I miss him dearly. That was a big loss. Wow, what a couple of cats. And you mentioned it in your interview so far, and it was one of my. It was actually next question on there. So, I wore my Led Zeppelin shirt from the 2007 reunion just because you had covered Led Zeppelin's "Stairway to Heaven." Now that's a song that it's kind of people would say that's a dangerous one. That's a gutsy one to cover. What made you want to cover that song? And in that guitar referencing that we're talking about, where would Jimmy Page fit in?
Yeah, well, I was a big Zeppelin fan when, you know, they were putting out all that music, Stairway to Heaven and all that. And, you know, some of the things that they did really kind of were like ear openers for me. Like sometimes they would just do like really insanely interesting things, like with different time signatures, and, you know, just the creativity of the music really inspired me. I never really thought of it as a gutsy thing to do, to play Stairway to Heaven. It was just a song that I always played since I was really young, and I just sort of kept playing it. I guess in one way you could kind of say it's gutsy, not in the sense that it's that people would consider it to be self-indulgent, but more from the standpoint of I got established in the jazz world, and so I was starting to get some flack for playing rock songs from the jazz establishment. But for me, like, I had always played that music, and so I didn't see any reason why I should stop, you know. And it didn't even occur to me, again, it just didn't even occur to me that it was unusual, because I always thought that when you're a jazz musician, you take popular songs and you play them in your own personal way. And so, you know, I heard Art Tatum doing, you know, You Take Advantage of Me. Well, then why can't I do Stairway to Heaven? And so that was a song that I always just sort of played. And then it was later, after I signed to Blue Note, and Bruce Lundvall, the president of Blue Note, he said, I noticed one thing interesting about you is that you take some of these more recent popular songs and you play them like standards. Nobody's really doing that. Well, nowadays, today, it's not a big deal, but at that time it was considered unusual, and that was the first time that I really thought that there was anything unusual about it.
Well, and I should rephrase, I think for a rock band to maybe cover Stairway, it's a gutsy thing. You have this reputation as a guitar virtuoso. I don't think anyone's going to question something that you cover. And what you said is also really relevant. It's another whole genre. So you're kind of doing something different. I think I was more implying that for, like, if a rock band was to try to cover that song, there'd be a lot of scrutiny. But the way you do it is really unique. And that's a great point. Whether even I'm just thinking Sergio Mendes, Fool on the Hill. I mean, a lot of people messing around with other people's songs and making them their own.
Well, what's funny too is, back when Stairway to Heaven first came out, jazz had been America's popular music for a long time, and now rock had kind of risen to the forefront, and rock was really out there, bold and adventurous and creative. And when I do Stairway to Heaven, I don't play it like a copy of the original, and I've gotten some flack from that on the rock side. And so I always thought that's funny, because now it's a reverse, because now rock is like the old fuddy-duddy music and jazz is the ascended, creative, bold music now.
Yeah, and that is funny that people would take a close look at your experimenting with it. Have you ever gotten to interact with have you ever met Jimmy Page?
No, I haven't met Jimmy Page.
Eddie Van Halen?
Yes, we met.
What was that like? Was that a fun thing? Was that cool?
Yeah, that was fun. We met at a thing with Les Paul. There's a film out called Les Paul. He changed the music, and there were a lot of guitar players invited to play on that. And so Eddie was there, and I did this song. It was my song, Flying Home, and I performed a solo version of that. Unfortunately, they didn't use it in the thing. I don't know why, but I was really, sometimes, I'm really self-critical, but I thought that was one of my best performances ever of that song. And afterwards, Van Halen came up to me and he said, "Wow, I'm speechless. I just had no idea you were that good." And that was nice. I appreciated that, because he had said something in a magazine about how I had kind of gotten away from the spirit of the music or something like that. And I don't know, it was based on not really having heard what I actually really do, And of course I knew about him. I was a big fan,
That's really cool, though, that you've even gotten to interact, because as you've also pointed out, the jazz and rock worlds don't always intersect either. So those special events are great ways for that to happen. Final question. You've been so generous with your time. And again, it's Stanley Jordan, and he's doing one more night. It'll be tonight, 6:30 and 9 at the Blue Note. When you've covered a lot of other people's stuff. He does that Eleanor Rigby that you do. Talk about like taking someone. That's a great example of making it your own too. I just think of some of your other cover stuff. Is there a person that you would like to collaborate with when you think of some of the great musicians that maybe you've never gotten to meet, or that have inspired you, that we still have, that are still here in their physical vessel? Is there anyone that you think, man, I like a list perhaps that you have of folks that you really want to get to someday?
Yeah, there are a lot of people I would love to work with if I had the opportunity. Stevie Wonder would be one. Cecil Taylor would be another one. Lorena McKinnon would be another one. Vicente Amigo, Carlos Santana. So that's just a quick list.
That's a great list. And some of those cats.
I would also add to that list Ariana Grande. She is so talented, just ridiculously talented. And she's one of these artists who I think as she grows can embrace so many different dimensions of music. And you've seen things like For example, you saw Christina Aguilera collaborating with Herbie Hancock, you know. So a lot of things like that where people who maybe started out more in the popular music vein, then as they grow, they start to embrace different styles. I would love to see her get into some jazz, and I'd love to encourage that, and maybe we could do something together.
You've got a great list of cats there. That's really cool. You ever met Stevie Wonder?
Yes, we met.
Is he a fan of your?
I think so. I mean, actually, you know, we met when I was still a street musician, because there was a guy, Edwin Birdsong, a vocalist. He saw me playing out on the street, and he actually brought me backstage because Stevie was setting up to perform somewhere in New York. I forget what venue. So he brought me backstage, and I played for Stevie. This was before my record deals, before like everything.
That must have been a thrill, huh? And to have him,
Mind blowing. Yeah.
to get that feedback from him. It's Stanley Jordan, and he's tonight at the Blue Note, 6:30 and 9, and our guest here on All Things Considered. I really, really appreciate it. I hope you had fun doing this. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed speaking with you, Dave. Aloha, my friends. It's Stanley Jordan with you again on All Things Considered. This is Hawaii Public Radio. And you might remember when I've been on the show with my friend Dave Lawrence. And aloha, Dave. And anyway, I'm back because I want to ask you to donate to the station. This station is a great resource. I know that you appreciate having it here in the community, as I do. Whenever I'm here, I listen, and so this is a real blessing to be able to contribute to the station. So please do what you can. This is a business model that relies on the generosity of people. So please do what you can to support the station. Thank you very much.